Boldwood presents Thor's Revenge, written by Donovan Cook and read by Sean Barrett. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. 3 days after the Battle of Jelling.
Thora!
Thora woke with a start and groaned as the pain tore through her midriff. Her hand went to her stomach, and she frowned when she felt the bandage, but then she remembered. She had been stabbed by Ivar Guthrumsson, and Charles was gone, taken by the bastards who had claimed to be friends and allies of Sven. Thora cursed the gods, but knew she could not blame them for what had happened. They had only themselves to blame. Lying back down again, Thora stared at the wooden rafters above her head and sensed a presence in the bed next to her. She then remembered Alfhild, the young thrall badly injured by one of Ivor's men when she had tried to warn Charles of the danger he was in, and turned her head, expecting to see her short, dark hair, but saw thick red hair instead. Under the hair was the freckled face of a girl about 6 winters old, her eyes closed as she slept peacefully. Your log. Thora grimaced as her niece's name struggled to come out of her dried mouth. Jorlog opened her eyes and blinked a few times before a smile appeared on her face.
Aunt Thora!
Moving faster than even the most skilled warriors that Thora had faced before, Jorlog jumped up and wrapped her arms around Thora's neck. Thora gasped at the pain in her stomach, and Jorlog jumped back, her face paling. Sorry. Thora forced herself to smile through the pain. I'm fine, Jorlog. I'm happy to see you, too. She stroked her niece's face and was glad to see her infectious smile. I stayed here the whole time. Not even the giants could carry me away, and I prayed to Frigg and to Eir every day. Eir was one of Odin's Valkyries, but she was also known for her healing abilities and would often be called upon when someone needed healing. She did. Refused to leave your side, Ingvild, Thora's aunt, said as she sat on a chair near the bed. How are you feeling, child? I'm hungry, Jorlog said, and then laughed when she realized the question wasn't aimed at her. Thora laughed before she could stop herself and winced at the pain as she clutched her stomach again. I live. She looked around the room and remembered that she was in the sleeping quarters at the back of the main hall, the room where the Jarl of Ribe would sleep, but Sven never. The room was big, with a large bed covered with thick furs and 2 chests, where Thora and Charles kept their belongings. There were also a few chairs, like the one Ingvild was sitting on, and a bucket by the door. In one corner was a small table with a wooden cross, a shrine Sven had made for Charles, who was a Christian. Thora glanced at Charles's chest at the foot of the bed, where his few possessions were kept, and felt a lump in the back of her throat. Get your aunt some water, Ingvild said, and as Jorlog jumped off the bed, she turned back to Thora. You did all you could, Thora, but even you could not have stopped Ivar and his men. Thora nodded as she remembered fighting the men Ivar had brought with him to Ribe, while most of the warriors were away with Sven fighting the King of Denmark. The only warriors left in Ribe were those loyal to Oleg, an old warrior who used to be one of Sven's hirdmen when he had been Jarl many winters ago. At least you killed that treacherous dog Oleg for betraying us and siding with Guthrum. We chopped his body into many pieces and scattered it along the river. That worm will never see Valhalla or hell, Ingvild said, as if she was reading Thora's mind. I still failed to protect Charles. Thora lowered her head as the tears ran down her cheeks. She closed her eyes and saw Charles thrown on the back of Ivar's horse and disappearing into the distance. No one could have done more than you did, Ingvild said. Sven should never have trusted Guthrum, but his greed for vengeance blinded him. Thora looked up and sighed. We were all blind, and not just about Guthrum, but Oleg as well. Sven didn't trust him. That's why he left him behind. He was worried Oleg would stab a knife in his back during the battle. Thora took the cup filled with water from Jolag and returned her smile. She emptied the cup without taking a breath and winced as her empty stomach churned. "Alfhild?" Thora asked about the thrall. Ingvild shook her head. "We did what we could, but her injuries were too much. The bastard must have ruptured her stomach when he kicked her." "Sven gave her a funeral and buried her in the graveyard," Jolag said, her eyes wide. Thora understood why. They did not usually bury thralls in the graveyard outside the town walls. Thora frowned at her aunt, who nodded. She remembered Sven coming into the room a few days before, covered in blood and dirt. "Sven is back." "Aye, the old bastard is back. Came rushing in with Rollo like they were being chased by the ice giants 3 days ago." Ingvild shook her head. "How many days have I missed?" 4 days. We were worried for the first few of them, weren't sure if you would make it, but the Norns decided it was not your time." Thora bit her cheek as she worried about what had happened while she had been sleeping. "What did I miss?" "They hung all the warriors who didn't help when Ivor's men attacked us. Well, the ones that didn't run away," Jolag said, and Thora raised her scarred eyebrow at the glee she detected in the girl's voice. "Sven did that?" Thora asked Ingvild. Ingvild shook her head. "Not Sven. Rollo. He strung every one of them up himself." "Rollo?" Thora's brows creased together, and then she remembered one of Ivor's men had killed Rollo's mother when she had tried to protect Charles. "Aye, by Odin. I've never seen the young man so furious. No one could stop him. It didn't matter how much those spineless worms had pleaded with him." Thora wasn't surprised. Rollo was a large man with shoulders broader than most. "And Sven?" "Sven is sad," Jolag said, staring at her own feet as if he felt the old man's pain. Thora glanced at Ingvild. "It's best you see for yourself." "He's here?" Thora asked. "I thought he'd be tearing Denmark apart to find Charles." Ingvild shook her head. "He is here. Not left the hole since he returned from the battle." Thora frowned as she wondered what impact losing Charles had had on Sven, and then turned to Jolag. "Get me some water." Jolag took Thora's cup and rushed to the bucket by the door, while Thora forced herself to get up. She winced as she struggled out of bed, and once she was up, she had to close her eyes to stop the room from spinning. "By Frigg, it feels like I've been asleep for too many winters." Ingvild smiled. "You are lucky Ivor keeps his knife clean, so we didn't have to worry too much about an infection. But your wound was deep and may take some time to heal properly." "I'll remember to thank him for that next time I see him. Where are my trousers?" Thora realized she was only wearing a sweat-stained tunic. She saw the scar on her leg, a recent wound from trying to protect Charles from warriors from Ribe, and shook her head, wondering how many more scars she would get because of the small, red-headed boy. Thora had been a warrior once, many winters ago, until her husband died. She had met him in the shield wall, and that was where he had died as well. After his death, Thora had sworn never to fight again, but she had been forced to pick a sword up on a few occasions since she met Charles outside the Christian church in Ribe. Jolag handed her clean trousers, and Thora struggled to get them on. Bending caused her pain, but then so did any movement, including breathing. "What happened with the battle?" Thora asked, to distract herself from the pain as she got dressed. "Do we have a new king?" Ingvild chewed her bottom lip as if she was debating what to tell Thora. But then she said, "We have no king." "No king?" Thora's brows furrowed as she tried to make sense of what her aunt had said. "What do you mean, no king? Who won the battle? Guthrum or Horik?" Ingvild sighed. Both bastards are dead, so neither won the battle, I'd say. Thora's head swam as she tried to digest this, and she was forced to sit down again. Both Guthrum and Horik are dead. Aye, and so are most of Denmark's Jarls. Only a matter of time now before East Francia marches her army into our lands and forces us all to kneel to her nailed god. How many men? Ingvild sighed. They say a countless number of warriors were lost. Many of Ribe's warriors did not return, and of those who did, some can never fight again. Thora wished she had something stronger than water to drink as she listened to her aunt. How? Was all she could think of saying as she tried to make sense of everything. Thora knew Horik had no heirs, but more worryingly were the deaths of the Jarls and their warriors. They kept order in their lands and protected those who paid landgilde, a land tax paid by farmers, to them. The battle lasted for 3 days, they say. Thousands of warriors died, and all for nothing. Ingvild spat to the ground in disgust. Neither Horik nor Guthrum cared about the men who died for their greed, and now both bastards are dead, and we have no one to protect us. What happened, Aunt Ingvild? Thora asked again. Ingvild shrugged. I wasn't there, was I? The old lady sighed. From what I heard, Horik died on the 3rd day. The old bastard decided to stand in the shield wall, and a spear opened his throat. And Guthrum? Thora asked, but was sure she already knew the answer. But others say different. Only the gods know what really happened. And Sven, but he has said little since he returned. They say Sven killed more than 1,000 men when he found out Guthrum had Charles, Jorlag boasted, but then looked at her feet when Ingvild glared at her. Guthrum had Charles? Thora rubbed her temples and was tempted to ask Jorlag to fetch her some ale. The last she saw of Charles, he was being carried away by Ivor, but she had passed out from her wound before she could contemplate where Ivor was taking him. Aye, Alvar said that during the battle, Halstein told Sven that he had seen Ivor ride into the camp with Charles on his horse. Sven left the battle to find out if that was true, but Alvar was too busy fighting to follow. After the battle, they found Halstein dead outside Guthrum's tent and Guthrum's corpse nearby. Guthrum's men left as if Thor was chasing them, so no one really knows what happened. Some warriors had told Alvar that Sven and Guthrum were fighting, and that Sven had accused Guthrum of taking money from the West Franks, but no one is really sure what was going on. Ingvild stared at Thora, her eyes searching Thora for the answer to that mystery. The West Franks? Thora struggled to make sense of everything her aunt was telling her. She had known that the East Franks were after Charles, but now the West Franks as well? Why did Ivor take Charles? Jorlag asked, her face scrunched up, before Ingvild could say anything. Thora wondered how much she could tell them as she felt their eyes on her. Did it really matter if they knew the truth? I think it was because of Charles's mother. She lives, and it seems she is someone very important. We know that much, Ingvild said, surprising Thora. How? Ingvild glanced at the door which led to the main hall. Because she is here, and she's not alone. She's here? Thora's head spun so much she thought she might vomit, and without thinking she jumped to her feet, but the pain tore through her and she dropped to her knees, clutching her stomach. Aunt Thora! Jorlag rushed to her side while Ingvild only tutted. Told you to be careful, Ingvild scowled at her. Why is she here? What does she want? Thora asked, ignoring her aunt's scowl. Her eyes darted towards the chest with Charles's belongings. Ingvild shrugged. I'm not even sure the gods know, but I think she is waiting for you. For me? Aye, every day for 3 days she comes in and sits in the hall, and all she does is stare at that door. She'd been here for 3 days. Thora frowned, wondering why Charles's mother was sitting here and waiting to talk to her. Did she hope Thora could lead her to Charles? Thora clenched her teeth and struggled to her feet. After a few deep breaths to ease the pain, she smiled at the worried face of Jorlug. There was only one way to find out what the woman claiming to be Charles's mother wanted. "Come, let's go meet this mother of Charles." "She's very serious, just like Charles." Jorlug looked at Thora, her eyebrows drawn together. "Are all Christians so serious?"
"Aye, sour bastards, all of them," Ingvild said, and got off the chair she'd been sitting on to follow Thora. Thora pushed the door open and stood there as she took in the sorry sight in the main hall. The hearth fire was nothing but a weak flame, while a few benches were filled with hunched-over figures. Old men and women, their faces pale and with blue rings under their eyes. Thora looked at the raised seat at the rear of the hall and was surprised that it was empty. She had expected to see Sven sitting there, but then turned her attention to the young man sitting by a table near the entrance of the hall. She ground her teeth as the dark-haired man stared back at her, his dark eyes wide and mouth open. Geralt. The young bastard had been with Charles when Thora had found him wandering around and asking about Sven. Geralt had told him he was a slave, and he had claimed to want to help Charles. But in the end he had been a spy for the East Franks and was leaving a trail for those hunting Charles to follow. The woman sitting beside Geralt put a hand on his arm, and Geralt glanced at her before he returned Thora's stare. If she could, Thora would have leapt across the hall and killed the bastard where he sat. "By Odin, what is the bastard doing here?" she wondered, and then looked at the woman sitting next to the slave, or spy. She wasn't really sure what he was. Thora raised an eyebrow as she scrutinized the woman, sitting straight-backed with an air of discontent about her. Thora couldn't tell the color of the woman's hair because of the head covering she was wearing, which matched the black dress she had on. On her chest was a golden cross, and Thora had to resist the urge to glance over her shoulder at Charles's chest in the room. She had not thought of the cross that had started all of this. The cross of Charlemagne that had been given to Thorkel, Charles's father, and that had led to his death. Thora wondered if the cross would be safe in the chest with Geralt around. She pushed the cross out of her mind and focused on the woman again. Thora did not need to be told that she was Charles's mother. She could see some of him in her. Next to the woman was an old man, a priest judging by his black dress and the cross similar to Charles's mother's around his neck. But Thora paid little attention to him as she eyed up the 2 Frankish warriors sitting near the group, both of them scowling at her. Jorlug was right. The Christians were too serious. Not that the rest of the people in the hall were cheerful. "You're awake," a rough voice said, and Thora was stunned to see Sven sitting on a bench near the back of the hall. But it wasn't that he was sitting there that surprised her. It was the way he looked. Sven reminded her of the drunk he had been before Charles had come along. His face was dirty, and the large sweat stains and dried blood on his tunic told Thora that he had not bathed or changed since he had returned. His grey beard, tinged with the red it had been once, was bushy and all over the place, and he had a few days' worth of stubble on his head, enough to reveal the large bald patch where an old, faded tattoo of a raven was, while bloodshot eyes stared at her over a nose made large from too much drink. Sven was shorter than most, with a round waist and a large stomach. His limbs were thick, both from muscle and fat, and Thora knew he had earned his nickname, the Boar, both from the fact that he had resembled one, and that he was as stubborn and as dangerous as the woodland creatures. Sven was a man who enjoyed his drink as much as he had once enjoyed standing in the shield wall, and neither had been good to him. His arms and hands were covered in old scars, and Thora raised an eyebrow at the fresh scabs on his knuckles. "By Thor, Sven!" Thora walked towards him and winced as she sat down, both at the pain from her wound and from the stench coming off Sven. "Charles is missing,
And here you sit, drinking your life away again." Thor had hoped that Sven had broken the spell that ale had over him. After the death of his wife, Sven had spent almost a lifetime wandering around Denmark, drinking his way to what he hoped would be an early death. But the gods had kept him alive. When Charles had found them, Thor had believed that that had been the reason, and as they had travelled north towards Ribe, the old Sven, the warrior he had been before, had returned. But that warrior was gone again, and the pathetic drunk had returned. Thor couldn't help but pity Sven, though. Most men would have drowned themselves if they had suffered like Sven had, but the gods had kept him alive. Sven looked at his cup, and Thora noticed the blood on the front of his tunic. She looked him over and saw another blood patch on his back. "I failed him, Thora. I failed him." Sven hung his head low as he took a shuddering breath, and fresh tears ran down his cheeks and soaked into his beard. "I should have listened to the boy. I should never have gone to fight Horik. By Odin, it was dumb, and the boy knew it. I knew it, but all I thought about was getting my revenge on Horik. And now, Charles is gone, and I don't know where he is. I failed him. I failed my son, his dying wish, and I failed him." Thora knew Sven believed that Horik had played a part in Thorkel being taken hostage by the Franks. The old king most likely had, but there had been nothing Sven could do about it until Guthrum had arrived. Thora glanced at the woman, and Gerald, as she tried to find the words that might comfort Sven. But they could not come, because she knew she had failed Charles as well. "We both failed him. We both should have seen what Guthrum was up to. He never needed you for that battle. He just wanted to get away from Ribe so that Ivo could take over the town." Sven emptied his ale, and a thrall rushed to get him another one. "Been drinking non-stop since he returned. Even Thor must be impressed that the bastard hasn't passed out yet," Ingvild said with a curled lip. "Should be out there searching for his grandson, or at least do more about the raids." "Raids?" Thora asked. "I told you, didn't I? Most of the Jarls died in that battle. There is no one to keep the peace, and now many warriors are taking advantage of it and are raiding all over the place. They say it's mostly Guthrum's men, leaderless and with nowhere to go now that their paymaster is dead." Thora scowled at this, and couldn't help but look at Charles's mother again. This was exactly what the Frankish kings would want. "What is being done about it?" "I had him. I had Charles. He was there, in front of me in Guthrum's tent," Sven said, ignoring what they had said. He looked at Thora again with fresh tears streaming down his face. "Charles was there, and I couldn't save him. I tried, Thora, fought as hard as I could, but I couldn't save him." Thora felt the kick in her chest. She could have said those exact words, but she knew now was not the time to be sitting around and feeling sorry for themselves. They had to act now. They had to find out where Charles was. "Where is Rollo, Alvar, the other senior men?" "Rollo has gone to Hedeby, left 2 days. We tried to stop him, but he refused to listen. Sven, in his rare moments of not drinking, arranged for the rest of the warriors to patrol the region and to protect the farmsteads from the raiders after they returned from the battle yesterday. The men barely had enough time to rest," Ingvild explained. Thora nodded, glad that something had been done to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. "Why did Rollo go to Hedeby? To find Charles?" "To find the bastard responsible for the death of his mother," Ingvild said. "But I'm sure if he finds Charles, he will bring him back." "So Ivo still has Charles?" Thora asked. "He ran away before I could kill him," Sven said, and then surprised everyone by jumping to his feet and throwing his cup at the hearth fire. The weak flame sizzled, but stayed alive, and Thora was glad to see that Sven still had some of his anger in him. But it didn't last long, as Sven just slumped down again with his head low. "He got away." He's been like that for the last few days. One moment raging like a sea storm, the next crying like a child. Ingvild shook her head. What has happened to him? Thora sighed. He's a broken man, Ingvild. Charles was meant to fix him, or at least that was what I had hoped. She put her hand on Sven's shoulder and glared at Charles's mother as if it was her fault that all of this was happening. We'll find him, Sven. By Thor, I swear we will find Charles. Chapter 2. Hedeby, the day before. Charles sat on the bench in the small wooden church in Hedeby and stared at the crude carving of Jesus. He remembered the first time he had seen it, when he and Gerald had come to Hedeby to find his grandfather. Charles had run into the church after some old men had told him his father had lied about his grandfather. The old men were right, though. His father had lied to him, but not intentionally, or at least Charles didn't think it was intentional. Before he died, killed by the men he had thought of as friends, Charles's father had told him to find his grandfather, a powerful Jarl in the north. But the man Charles had found was a fat, old, smelly drunk, and afraid of his own shadow. Charles looked at Jesus' face, but he didn't expect to find any comfort from the carving. The two holes which Charles guessed were the eyes were as empty as Charles felt. Behind him, Ivor hawked and spat, and Charles felt his irritation grow, but then glared at the wooden Jesus again. This was his house. Charles thought of the large golden cross his father had given him before he died. It had a large ruby in the centre, just above the sign of Charlemagne, and the edge of the cross was rimmed with different-coloured gems. It was the most beautiful thing Charles had ever seen, and had been given to his father by his mother when he was just a baby. Although Charles was beginning to wish she hadn't. All the cross had brought him was the deaths of those he loved. His father, Thora, Oda, and Alfhild, all dead because of the cross, which was back in Ribe. He didn't even know if his grandfather had survived his fight with Guthrum. The last Charles had seen of him, Guthrum had the upper hand, but Ivor had dragged Charles out of Guthrum's tent before he could see how the fight had turned out. Charles wondered why God was allowing all these bad things to happen. He knew the Danes believed their gods were cruel, but he had always been taught that God was loving and protective of his people. But perhaps the priests were wrong. Perhaps God was as cruel as the heathen gods and enjoyed watching people suffer. Charles gripped the small wooden cross around his neck, and his eyes darted to the wooden Jesus. But nothing happened, although he wasn't sure what he thought would happen. "What are you doing here?" Charles jumped as a voice hissed behind him. The man spoke Danish as he glared at Ivor, but his Frankish accent sounded different from where he had grown up in East Francia. "You were supposed to wait for me in Ribe. That was the deal I made with your father." The man looked like every other Frankish man Charles had ever seen. He was the same height as most, and his face was unremarkable. The cloak that covered his narrow shoulders was covered in dust, but otherwise seemed clean, and his light-coloured hair and beard were neatly groomed. But it was his eyes that stood out, because they reminded Charles of Gerald's eyes, always scanning the surroundings, always searching for a threat. At first, Charles thought that was because Gerald was a slave and he needed to be careful, otherwise he would be beaten by his master. But then Charles had learnt it was because Gerald and his dead master were spies sent to capture him and take him to those responsible for his father's death. Charles decided he did not like the man who was now studying him, with his nose crinkled in disgust. Charles could not blame the man, though. His clothes reeked because of the horse's sweat, and because he had peed his pants a few times as Ivor and his men raced to Hedeby and had refused to stop. They had only stopped when the sun had set and the horses were too exhausted to continue. Charles's red hair, which had grown long in the weeks since he had come to Denmark, was matted with sweat and dust, and, Even though he had not seen his face, he was sure it was dirty as well, and swollen from when Guthrum had struck him the day before. Charles was small for his age, just like his grandfather and his father had been, and unlike them, he was thin and narrow-shouldered, but he had the same blue eyes they had. "We had no choice. Ribe became unsafe. We had to leave," Ivor, the son of a man who had pretended to be his grandfather's friend, said. But just like Gerold had betrayed him, Ivor's father had betrayed Charles's grandfather. That was why Charles was now sitting in the church in Hedeby and was surrounded by a handful of Danish warriors. Ivor was tall and thin, but had long, muscular arms. His light-coloured hair and beard were dirty from dust, sweat, and blood, which made his eyes seem harder than they already were. Ivor also had a cut on his leg, given to him by Sven, which had been bound but was still bleeding. At first, Charles had been frightened of men like Ivor, but not any more, especially because he knew his grandfather was more dangerous than any of them. "That is not what I had agreed with your father," the Frank said again, his eyes darting around the church, which was quiet because Ivor's men had chased everyone out. "Well, Loki decided your plan didn't work for him and messed things up. We couldn't stay in Ribe. And then that little bastard's," Ivor jabbed a finger at Charles, "grandfather made sure we couldn't stay in my father's camp at the battle." An image of his grandfather, exhausted and covered in blood, fighting Guthrum after discovering that he had really been sent by the king of West Francia, came to Charles. When they had arrived in Hedeby that morning, Ivor had tried to find out about the battle, but news had not spread this far south yet. Not knowing what else to do, Ivor had come to the church, as he believed no one would look for them there, and had sent one of his men to find the Frank. But Charles believed his grandfather still lived. Thor had told him that their gods were not ready for him to die yet. "Sven still lives?" the Frank asked as he glanced at Charles with a raised eyebrow. "I doubt it," Ivor grinned. "My father would have killed him by now. The fat bastard spent too many years drinking instead of fighting." "Then why are you here?" the man asked again, "tainting the house of God with your filthy presence?" Ivor clenched his fists. "I'm staying here until I hear from my father. Thought it would be safer hiding in a church. Nobody would look for us here. What does it matter anyway? We have the boy just like you wanted." The Frank's mouth twitched as he looked at Charles again. "It's not just the boy I want." Ivor shrugged. "You never told my father that?" "No, I didn't." Charles kept his eyes fixed on the wooden Jesus as the Frank sat down next to him. The bench creaked, and Charles sensed the man's eyes on him, but he refused to look at him. Charles was determined not to tell him anything. He would not make the same mistake as he had done with Gerold. "What's your name?" the Frank asked in Frankish, which sent Charles's heart racing. The man waited for a few heartbeats. "They think your grandfather is dead. If they are right, then there is no one to keep you safe from them but me." Charles glanced at the Danes standing behind him and saw Ivor watching them while the other 6 looked bored. Charles hated how much he looked like Guthrum. "My grandfather is not dead, and when he finds you, he will kill you and Ivor and his men." The Frank smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was more like the ones Charles usually got from adults when they thought he had said something dumb. "That's not very Christian of you, to wish others dead. And I've been told that you are a very good Christian." Charles glanced at the wooden Jesus, but this time he did not expect it to do anything. Not like before. It was just a simple wooden carving, and not even a good one. "You're not a Christian?" he said. "Oh, but I am." The man pulled a small golden cross out of his tunic and showed it to Charles. "I go to church every day when I can, and even when I don't, I say all my prayers. Do you do that?" Charles started and then stopped. He had not prayed in days. Charles wasn't sure if praying really did anything anymore. He remembered what Gerold had told him soon after they had first met. Neither God nor any of his angels will come down here and save us." Charles hadn't believed Geralt then, but now those words felt like the only true thing Geralt had ever said to him. "Praying does nothing. It doesn't help." The Frank stayed silent for a while, and Charles had to look to make sure that he was still there. The man smiled when he saw Charles glancing at him. "Then you are praying for the wrong reasons." Charles frowned at this, but stayed silent. "My name is Roll, and unlike those men behind us, I don't want to hurt you." "Then what do you want?" Charles knew the man was after the cross, but he didn't say that. "For now, I would like to know your name." Charles thought about it and decided that nothing bad could happen from the man knowing his name. "Charles." "Charles," Roll repeated as he twisted in his seat so that he could face him. "Like Charles the Great." Charles nodded. His father had named him after the great Frankish emperor. "Do you know much about Charlemagne?" "No," Charles said. He only knew that Charlemagne had built a large empire which had comprised what was now West, Middle, and East Francia. But that empire was gone now, broken apart by the grandsons of Charlemagne, who could not agree how the empire should be ruled and, more importantly, who should rule the empire. Charles's father had fought for the king of East Francia, Louis II, in the Civil War, which led to that breakup. "Perhaps I can tell you more about him. Would you like that?" Charles shrugged. He wanted to know more about Charlemagne, but he didn't trust Roll. "But for me to take you away from this place and tell you those stories, I need one thing from you." "I don't have anything," Charles said, which wasn't a lie. All he had were the dirty clothes he wore and the small wooden cross around his neck. "We both know that's not true, Charles. Now tell me where I can find the cross, and we can leave this godless place." Charles pulled the wooden cross from his neck and showed it to Roll. "This cross?" Roll's mouth twitched, but then he composed himself again and smiled. "No, not that one. You know the one I am talking about. Charlemagne's cross. The one your mother gave you." Charles's heart skipped in his chest, and he had to hide his hands so that Roll couldn't see them shaking. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Now is not the time to be smart, Charles. Tell me where the cross is, and I can take you to your mother." This time, Charles's heart felt like it was going to break out of his chest. His wide eyes snapped towards Roll before he could stop himself, and he saw the smile of satisfaction on the man's face. Charles had been told his mother had died when he was born, and he had been raised by his father, who knew more about fighting battles than children. Although recently, Charles was beginning to wonder if that was really true. He wanted to believe Roll, only because he wanted his mother to be alive. But Charles had been lied to too many times over the last few weeks to believe the man he had just met. Charles took deep breaths to calm himself, just like Thor had taught him to do when she was teaching him to defend himself, and held up the small wooden cross he wore around his neck again. "This is the cross my mother gave to me?" The smile fell from Roll's lips and was replaced by a snarl. "I'll only ask you one more time. Where is the cross?" Charles shrugged. "I don't know what you're talking about." Roll lifted his hand as if he was going to backhand Charles across the Instead, he glared at Roll, daring him to smack him. Not that it would have made much of a difference to Charles anyway. Half his face was already bruised and swollen from when Guttrum had smacked him. Roll's hand hovered in the air for a while, before he sighed and lowered his hand. "If you don't have the stomach to beat information out of the little piglet, then let me do it," Ivor said in Danish as he pressed his fist into his hand. His men grunted in approval, but Charles doubted they even knew what Roll and Charles were talking about. "What makes you think I need to beat information out of the boy?" Roll asked in Danish. "I'm not dumb." Ivor limped closer. "I might not understand what you are talking about, but I can see that you are getting nowhere. Leave the boy with us, and he'll soon tell you everything you need to know." Again his men grunted in approval. Charles glanced at the wooden Jesus, and then at the warriors. Charles glanced at the wooden Jesus, and then at the warriors, all of them covered in dirt and stinking of sweat. But he did not feel afraid, not like he had done before. He wasn't sure if it was because he had seen more death and violence than a boy of 9 should see, or just because he didn't care any more. So many people had died because of him. Perhaps this was his punishment from God, although Charles didn't know what he was being punished for. "No, the boy doesn't need to be beaten," Rolls said as he looked at Charles. Charles saw something different in Rolls' eyes, something he had not seen before, and he frowned as he tried to understand what it was. "The boy is brave, and he is doing what any good Christian should do." "And what is that?" Eivor glared at Charles. "He's putting his faith in God, and trusting that the Almighty will protect him." Rolls smiled, but Charles knew that wasn't true. "No, not in God," Charles said. "In my grandfather. He will find me and kill all of you." The Danish warriors laughed as Eivor said, "The old bastard is dead. There is no way he could have defeated—" Before Eivor could finish his sentence, they heard a cry outside the church. The men tensed and their hands went to their weapons as they looked at Eivor, who shrugged. The cries were not war cries, or warriors calling for blood. They were men and women, wailing as if some great tragedy had happened. Eivor looked at one of his men. "Go find out what's going on." He then turned to Charles and Roll. "You two stay where you are." They waited in silence as one of Eivor's men ran outside, and, when he returned a while later, he wore a frown which suggested he was struggling with some internal thoughts. "What is it? What in Odin's name is going on?" The man stopped and frowned at Eivor. "Jarl Thorgeir has returned. They say Horik is dead." The church was filled with a sudden silence, as everyone took in the news. Charles glanced at the wooden statue of Jesus, and it seemed like even Jesus was holding his breath to see what would happen now. And then the silence was broken by Eivor's laugh. "My father did it! He defeated the old bastard! My father is the King of Denmark!" He clasped the man's shoulders, but then stopped when the man did not celebrate with him. "What, in Odin's name, is it?" "Your father is also dead." "My father? Dead?" Charles could not see Eivor's face, but he imagined the man's eyebrows were drawn together as he tried to make sense of what he had just been told. Charles, though, could not help but smile. He knew his grandfather would kill the man who had betrayed him. Roll glanced at Charles and scowled at his smile. "How?" Eivor turned and glared at Charles. Eivor's red face would have frightened Charles before, but it didn't this time. "I told you my grandfather would kill him, just like he will kill you." Charles's heart raced in his chest as he spoke the words. Before anyone could react, Eivor launched himself at Charles. He jumped over the bench and grabbed Charles by his tunic before lifting him up and screaming in his face, "Impossible! There's no way that fat bastard could have killed my father!" Charles closed his eyes as Eivor's spit splattered his face, but then heard Raoul say, "Let go of the boy, heathen." Eivor ignored the Frank and turned back to the warrior who had given him the news. "How did it happen?" The man shrugged. "No one knows what had happened, but there are rumors that one of his Jarls killed him. They say the man wanted to be king himself." "My father is dead." Eivor let go of Charles, who collapsed onto the bench he had been sitting on before, and hunched over, and his shoulders shook. Charles moved back to make sure he was out of Eivor's reach, as Eivor said, "My father, dead." Eivor's remaining men stared at each other and could only shrug, as they didn't seem to know what to do. Eivor looked up and glared at Charles. His tear-streaked eyes creased and his face reddened. "You little bastard! This is all your fault! My father died because of you. My future gone. I would have been the next king if it weren't for you." Ivar pulled his sword from its scabbard. "You will die for this, little piglet." Roll then surprised. "No, he won't. And none of this is the boy's fault." Ivar lowered his sword and glared at the smaller Frank. The blade trembled in his hand, and for a heartbeat, Charles thought Ivar might attack Roll. "I was supposed to be king. My father was going to share the crown with me. You cannot speak to me like that." Roll shrugged, and Charles couldn't help but admire the man's bravery. He looked weak compared to the 7 large Danish warriors, yet he still faced them. "I doubt your father was ever going to do that. And the truth, Ivar, is that you and your father failed. I gave your father a lifetime's worth of gold to find the boy, and the dumb heathen decided to raise an army against his uncle instead. And to make things worse, he failed in that, and failed to do the one thing that I required of him." Roll sighed. "I guess that is the price I pay for trusting heathens to do God's work." Charles scowled at that. He didn't understand why he was so important, why Roll would pay Ivar's father so much just to get to him. He wondered if it was because he had the cross of Charlemagne, but something told him there was more to it than that. Roll had said that he wanted Charles as well. Charles kept his thoughts to himself as an ugly sneer spread across Ivar's red face. "By Thor, I've had enough of you Christians. You've been nothing but a thorn in my side. I do not need you anymore. After I deal with you, I'll kill the fat pig in Ribe as well. Arvid, kill this bastard and grab the boy." Arvid, a large warrior with broad shoulders and a shaved head, grinned as he walked towards Roll. "Time to Before he could finish his sentence, Roll's hand shot out, moving so fast that Charles never saw the knife he must have had. He only knew of it when the hairs of Arvid's beard fell to the ground and blood started leaking from the large cut across his throat. Arvid's eyes bulged as he struggled to breathe before he collapsed to the ground. A gasp made them all turn to the rear of the church, where 3 priests had walked in. Charles recognized Father Hildegard, the young priest who had gone to Ribe to build a church. He had left shortly before the battle, saying that he needed to see a friend and ask for help to build it. Father Hildegard and the other priests gaped at the scene in front of them, and then they all turned and rushed out. Father Hildegard glanced at Charles as he fled, his face almost apologetic. But Charles wasn't surprised. The young priest couldn't defend himself when he had been attacked by Haldor, a drunk who wasn't even a warrior. Ivar tried to use the distraction to his advantage, and roared as he charged at Roll. Charles turned in time to see the smaller man duck. Roll turned and grabbed Ivar by his long hair before kicking the cut on Ivar's leg. Ivar cried out and dropped to his knees, his eyes wide as Roll pressed a bloodied blade against his neck. "God will forgive me for killing you heathens in his church, even if this is just a modest one. If your men take one step closer, then I'll slit your throat, and your dreams of being king will go with you to hell." The warriors behind Roll hesitated as Charles gaped at Roll's skill. He had never seen anyone move like that, not even Thor or his grandfather. Roll leaned closer to Ivar. "You and your father were supposed to wait for me in Ribe with the boy. It wasn't just him I needed, but something he has, something he left behind in Ribe. And now I need to go to that cursed town and find the item he is hiding from me." But you never told us about it. If you had, we could have got it for you," Ivar protested, his wild eyes fixed on Charles as if he was blaming him for this. Roll laughed. "I would never trust you with something that sacred." Raoul glanced at Charles as he gasped. Charles wished he knew why the cross was so important to the kings of Francia. He remembered the old Gaudy his grandfather had taken him to, saying that there was something inside the cross, an old magic that made even the Gaudy nervous. But Charles had refused to believe the Gaudy. It was just a cross, one that his mother had stolen from King Louis and given to his father.
"Can go back. We can get this thing you want," Ivor said.
Raoul shook his head and pressed the knife harder against Ivor's neck.
"You heathens are really dumb, aren't you? What do you think would happen if you return to Ribe now, especially if Sven the boar still lives? I'll kill the bastard. I'll take Ribe for myself, and then you can search for this thing."
"And how will you take Ribe?" Raoul glanced dismissively at Ivor's remaining men. "You barely have a handful of men left."
"Support me, like you supported my father. I can get more men. I can buy the support of the other Jarls. That way, I can take Ribe, even become King of Denmark."
Even to Charles, Ivor just sounded desperate, but he still looked at Raoul to see how the Frank would respond.
Raoul sighed and let go of Ivor, who rubbed his neck. "No, Ivor, your father failed me and my king. I'll stand in a pit of snakes before I trust you heathens again. And besides, you are not the man he was. No, I must go myself and find—"
"Which I will." Raoul turned his attention back to the Danes. "You will stay in Hedeby and guard the boy until I return." Ivor glared at Raoul as he gripped his injured leg and struggled to his feet, but he kept his distance.
"And why would we do that if you refused to support me?"
Raoul smiled. "Because you have nothing left, Ivor. That is why. But if you succeed in this one small task, then I can make sure my king still has some use for you. And before you think of betraying me, just remember, I have men in this town, men who can kill you before you even know they are there." Ivor hesitated for a heartbeat, his eyes darting around the church, and then nodded.
"Fine, but you better return. Otherwise, we kill the piglet."
Raoul smiled and walked towards Charles. In Frankish he said, "Now tell me where I can find the cross." Charles clenched his fist as he fought to stay strong.
"My grandfather would kill you when he finds you."
This time Raoul smiled. "There is something I like about you, Charles. You are a very brave boy, but you are naive. You better hope your grandfather doesn't find me, not if you still want him to live." With that, Raoul turned and walked out of the church. Charles looked at the wooden Jesus again. He hadn't prayed for days. But he prayed now. He prayed his grandfather was on his way to Hedeby, and that he would slaughter all these men. Chapter 3. Rollo clenched his fists as he walked through Hedeby, his scowling eyes scanning the busy streets for Ivor or for any of his men. Traders in Ribe had told him many things about the large trading town which bordered the East Frankish kingdom. They had told him of the large market in the town centre, larger than the one in Ribe, filled with people and goods from all over Midgard. Men who looked so strange that you would think they were from the other 8 realms which were connected to the great tree. They had told Rollo of the magnificent hall of Jarl Togir, and of the many places where a tired man could get a drink and a woman to warm his bed. For as long as he could remember, Rollo had wanted to come to Hedeby, but now that he was here, all he wanted to do was to burn the town to the ground. It would have been easier to do that, to find the men he was hunting, than walking through endless streets, hoping that the gods smiled on him. Rollo was wearing his brynja, the one he had taken from his father's old war chest, and his helmet. His Dane axe was strapped to his back, and his small one-handed axe. The brynja Rollo wore was too big for him, though, something that had surprised Rollo the first time he had put it on. He had always imagined that his father was a giant, especially as he couldn't remember much of the man who had died when he was just a small boy. But the brynja that was too large for him showed Rollo that his father had been even bigger than what he was. Rollo had often wondered if his son, Sigmund, would grow out to be just as large as him, or perhaps larger. The boy was only 8 winters old and was already bigger than others his age, bigger even than some boys 2 winters older. He pictured Sigmund standing in front of their house, his face bruised and with a large lump on his head. But it was the tears in his boy's eyes that tugged at his heart. Sigmund felt guilty that he had not been able to defend his grandmother, and it didn't matter how often Rollo or his wife had to tell him that he had done all he could. Rollo couldn't even blame Sven or Charles for his mother's death. She had been a stubborn woman who had done what she believed was right, and Rollo had to honor her for that. But first he wanted to find the bastard responsible for her death and gut the man slowly and painfully. Unfortunately, that man was dead, killed by Ribe's Christian blacksmith. But Ivo still lived.